Hello, I'm Dalton Delan. I'm a columnist for the Berkshire Eagle, and this is Eagle Reels, where we take you beyond the news. My special guest today, First Amendment attorney Jeffrey Pyle. Jeff, welcome.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. So, Jeff, I'm going to kind of quote, an old saying, but first they came for the universities. Now they're coming for the big law firms. Prestigious Paul Weiss firm and others have caved to the need to get government business and not be shut out from it. Can you explain to us what's going on?
Well, William Shakespeare said, first thing we do, let's kill all the lawyers. And I suppose that when you look at all of the various victims of the current administration, lawyers might not fall very highly on the list of sympathetic characters. But I'd like to make the case that we should all actually care about what is happening with these big law firms. Donald Trump is waging war on the practice of law. He is waging war on the possibility of zealous representation of clients by lawyers. Everybody professes to hate lawyers, except when they need one themselves. And then they love their lawyer because their lawyer advocates for them on issues that matter. And a lawyer's job is to represent his or her client zealously, even if, and especially if, that makes the government upset. Many cases that lawyers take are adverse to the interests of the government. What Donald Trump is doing is saying, if you take on cases or clients that make me mad, then I will use the full weight of the federal government to punish your law firm for doing so. That is a chilling position for any president of the United States to take, or any government official to take. And it is a direct threat to the very idea of the rule of law.
Yeah, Jeff, that what you were just saying, and what I would call that either revenge or dissent suppression mode. Okay, as I read, and a journalist, I read it and reread it. And actually, because I was so shocked, the March 14th presidential action against Paul Weiss, it didn't, I'm a jailhouse lawyer, okay? But to my never convicted eyes, I didn't think that order would pass muster in a Law 101 class, let alone constitutional review. I actually was kind of stunned that, does the DOJ, does no one get involved? It felt just like, the president, the way he talks, slamming it out. It didn't feel like anything I would normally expect to see in a presidential order. Did you have a similar reaction? And how do they do this?
Well, I've had that reaction to many presidential orders that this administration has handed down, and it demonstrates that the people advising him have not put up any guardrails to Donald Trump whatsoever, least of all lawyers within the Department of Justice. The basis for the Paul Weiss order was that it employed Mark Pomerantz, who had been involved in moving over to Alvin Bragg's office and then participating in criminal cases against Donald Trump. What the order, of course, doesn't mention is that Donald Trump was convicted on one of those charges, 34 felony counts of falsifying business records. So a law firm is being punished for formerly employing a lawyer who's successfully brought a criminal prosecution against the president. Similarly, Perkins Coie, one of the law firms that has fought back, it's being targeted because it represented Hillary Clinton once upon a time. Jenner and Block, one of the other firms that he's issued an order against, hired Andrew Weissman, who worked on Robert Mueller's team during the investigation into the campaign's connections with Russia. And Andrew Weissman, many viewers might remember him or see him on MSNBC as a commentator. He's a brilliant lawyer, but solely because Jenner and Block hired him, Donald Trump now thinks that he can punish Jenner and Block. There are no guardrails now on Donald Trump, and he is abusing the power of the executive to punish lawyers as a result.
Is that abuse, Jeff? Of course, it feels, I think, wrong. It feels unseemly. Is it illegal?
Yes, in many, many ways. The lawsuits that law firms have filed against Donald Trump lay the illegality out in many different ways. The Wilmer Hale lawsuit, for example, filed by Paul Clement, I should mention, who is a noted conservative lawyer and Supreme Court advocate, lays out a number of different ways in which these orders violate the Constitution. One is that they are a violation of the First Amendment. Freedom of speech. Lawyers have the right to speak. They have the right to speak on behalf of their clients. They cannot be, under longstanding Supreme Court case law, they cannot be punished with, for example, revocation of security clearances or revocation of their ability to enter federal buildings because of their speech representing clients. That it also applies to the freedom to petition the government for redress of grievances. Donald Trump has punished Wilmer Hale, it seems, because Wilmer Hale represented Harvard in its case defending Harvard's affirmative action policies and procedures, which Donald Trump in his executive order described as defending racial discrimination. Harvard had the right to argue to the courts that its policies were lawful. That is part of the First Amendment right to petition the government. Freedom of association. These lawyers have the right to associate with their clients. And let's not forget, these orders violate the rights of the clients as well. The right of the client to choose their own lawyer. The right of the clients to choose their own lawyer is protected by both the Fifth and the Sixth Amendments to the United States Constitution. If you are in trouble, you need to be able to hire a lawyer you can trust. And that gets to the broad chilling effect of these orders as well. It's not just about the effect of these lawyers on these law firms, which is a significant effect. It also sends a message to every other law firm that if you take on a case that makes the president angry, you could be next. Your law firm could be put out of existence because you make the president upset. That is the road to autocracy. That is the road to making everybody obey in advance, including lawyers. Lawyers are uniquely positioned to restrain government overreach. And what Donald Trump is trying to do is twofold here. Number one, seek revenge on his enemies. And number two, send a message to everybody else that if you fight me, you'll be put out of business.
So to broaden that a moment, if you're the Associated Press and you're failing to say that it's the Gulf of America, and if you're a business that has had diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, in place in any way, this is actually termed, quote, unlawful activity, and the government won't do business with you. So it feels Orwellian to me. It's that kind of the doublespeak where, wait a minute, everything you just described, Jeff, the unlawful nature of restricting people's ability to have fair representation and so forth, by instead you throw at them, no, because you're an unlawful person or doing an unlawful activity, that's why. So,
well, yes, this is certainly Orwellian doublespeak. It's also Donald Trump trying to position himself to be both the legislative branch, the presidential, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. It is the judiciary that says what the law is, not Donald Trump. He may think DEI policies are unlawful, but no one has determined that any of these law firms have DEI policies that are unlawful. He doesn't get to just decide that. That's not what the Constitution says. I agree with you on the chilling effect of all this, but let me give you one other example. I just signed on as a friend of the court to a brief that is being filed in these cases on behalf of 61 news organizations and press freedom advocates. And our argument is that if orders like this are allowed to stand, it is the free press that will suffer greatly, because the whole purpose of the press, of course, is to be antagonistic, if you will, to the government. The job of the press is to bring the government to account and to force transparency in the governmental system. If the press tries to report on governmental activity and receives, for example, some form of resistance to that, they're going to look for legal counsel. Legal counsel will then tell them, oh, well, you have a really good case and you should be able to publish this, but I can't represent you because if I do, I'm going to antagonize Donald Trump and I could lose my entire law business. And the press could be deprived of legal counsel as a result of this kind of thing. This is just one of the many examples in which that I think illustrate why we need vigorous lawyers representing their clients zealously. And that cannot happen if vigorous representation becomes a cause for punishment.
Thank you for signing on in that way. As a journalist, I appreciate that very much. So when you look then at that resistance versus capitulation, I hate to simplify it, but what are you seeing as you look out on the landscape? Maybe it depends on how big you are and how much business you're doing, but how does it break down in the legal profession? How much resistance and how much going along with this because of, well, it's America, right? And firms have to survive. So money talks, even if you privately don't agree with it. What are you seeing, and what do you among your colleagues? How do you feel about how much are people going along when clearly you feel that they should not be going along?
Well, every lawyer I've spoken to is mystified as to why a law firm would capitulate in this way rather than fight. Paul Weiss and the other firms must have known that if they had gone to court to fight these orders, they would have a high chance of winning. And Perkins Coie and Wilmer Hale and Jenner and Block, by fighting, have shown that courts will very quickly strike down these retaliatory orders. The law firms must have calculated that the loss of money would be so great, even if they did win, that they had to capitulate to the tune of hundreds of millions, maybe $1 billion in promised pro bono services to causes that Donald Trump says he believes in, such as veterans services and fighting anti-Semitism. Put a pin in whether or not Donald Trump and most people share the same definition of anti-Semitism. But the notion that law firms would decide to outsource the determination of what pro bono cases they take on to the president of the United States is anathema to how a law firm should run its business. The other question arises, suppose they take on pro bono cases that are oppositional to what Donald Trump believes in. Does Donald Trump then say they violated the agreement? That is a distinct possibility. So these firms are now beholden to Trump for the next 4 years, at least. And I fail to see how coming to a so-called settlement agreement with these law firms will be to any advantage of these firms in the short run or the long run. That's just me. It is true that the managing partner of Paul Weiss said that this was an existential threat to Paul Weiss. I say better for a law firm to go out of business than to become an agent of totalitarianism.
Thank you. Thank you. That would feel like it's of a piece with all the warnings that at the moment we're disregarding from Hannah Arendt, I think. So on one of these conversations recently, I spoke with an immigration attorney, and recently in the headlines, we've seen the interesting, I don't know, you'll correct me if I call it fence sitting by the Supreme Court and by Chief Justice Roberts in particular. So with the man deported to El Salvador, we have the interesting court directive that he should be returned, but it didn't say he must. So, clearly a delicate balance at the moment trying to be struck, but we've got these executive orders and actions that seem to be overriding normative, customary judicial process. And again, in another conversation, we've had people point out that judicial process in many cases is going to be too slow to catch up with this. So what do you feel about that, when fighting this unusual tsunami of executive orders that we have to, try to catch up with, and can you?
Well, I have faith that ultimately we can. A great deal of harm is going to be done to a great number of people before the court system is able to finally enforce the Constitution against the executive branch. By the time this interview is ever seen by anybody, I'm sure there will be a great deal more water under the bridge of deportations and executive action. So I'll try to speak broadly. Marco Rubio just recently was forced to release a memo in which he detailed his justification for detaining, I would say kidnapping, Mahmoud Khalil, a Columbia graduate student who was the first of these public cases where a green card holder had his green card supposedly revoked and was put into detention because of the views he espoused. Marco Rubio said in this memorandum that he has the ability to, and I will quote, revoke a person's immigration status based solely on their, quote, past, current, or expected beliefs, statements, or associations that are otherwise lawful. So according to Marco Rubio, immigrants, or non-citizens, I should say, have no rights. They can be detained, have their immigration status revoked, and deported to anywhere by this administration because of their beliefs. That's not what the Constitution says. The Constitution applies to all persons. The Fifth Amendment to the Constitution says all persons have the right to liberty, and that right cannot be taken away without due process of law. Same with the 14th Amendment as applied to the state. Immigrants, non-citizens are persons, and they are entitled to those rights. So like it or not, even people here without a documented status have the right to free speech and cannot have that right taken away from them without due process of law. This administration is acting as if we had a different kind of constitution than the one we do. And that should be very troubling to everyone. As you stated at the beginning of this interview, the fact that he's coming for immigrants now doesn't mean he won't come for others later. And Sonia Sotomayor, in her recent concurrence in this very case that you just mentioned, said if they can deport someone to El Salvador on their whim without due process, they don't have to just restrain that to non-citizens. They could do that to citizens too.
Thank you very much. Well, in the face of this, in the face of everything we've just been talking about, let's go back personally. What got you into your work and is what you're facing now here and we're talking about, is it shaking you or is it re-solidifying why you do what you do?
It's re-solidifying why I do what I do. And I won't exaggerate what I do. I represent the news media in cases, some of which have to do with government accountability and transparency, and also defending them from libel cases, which is another way Donald Trump wants to use the law to suppress press freedom. The news media and lawyering have to be protected. And I'm determined to keep doing what I can to fight back against this kind of abuse of power. That may not be very much, but if we all do it together, if we all fight back, we all march in the streets, and we all put pressure on Republicans especially to stand up for what makes this country great, then I think that we can win.
Well, thank you. That smacks of hope, and I like hope. And if you look practically, final question, though, at this court and in these few years we're in right now with this administration, your expectation that some of these thunder shocks that we're experiencing in the first year, that they're going to get tempered? How do you feel about where the court's going to land on a number of the issues we've touched on these suppressions, on immigration, on the pressures on law firms? Do you think that there are enough justices that align with Justice Sotomayor?
Well, the Sotomayor opinion came in a unanimous court ruling. There were no noted dissents. So that is some sign of hope. That is an extreme case, however, of a person who was granted protected status within the United States, and the government actually confessed that he had been removed to El Salvador in error. Whether they take the same position when the government fights against that determination is a question that remains to be seen. On First Amendment issues, this court has been very good, I would say, notwithstanding my vehement disagreement with the court on many other issues. On the First Amendment, the court has rather strongly been a pro-free speech court. These lawyer cases are First Amendment related cases, and I expect the court also, they are all professional lawyers. They all understand the importance of zealous advocacy, even against the government. So I am hopeful for good Supreme Court rulings on some of these issues. Whether those rulings will come quickly enough to prevent massive injustice, I'm not so sure about. This court has shown a reluctance to speak with the kind of urgency that is needed. And even in the case about removal under the Alien Enemies Act, the court had every opportunity to say, the Alien Enemies Act doesn't apply now because we're not under an invasion. That's what the Act of 1798 was intended to apply to, when the country was under an actual invasion. Donald Trump's assertion that a Venezuelan gang is invading the country does not make it an invasion. And the court could have just said that, and that would be better. And so I criticize the court for not realizing the urgency of the moment and acting with the speed that is needed here. Yes, we may ultimately get a favorable ruling on some of these issues. My worry is that it will come too late.
Thank you, Jeff. I guess I've always said myself that you may try sitting on a fence, but you may find that it's not a very comfortable place to sit for very long. Jeff Pyle, First Amendment attorney, thank you so much for joining us today, and I think enlightening us, and I think probably putting some brightness into our day that we'll see some correction occurring here. I think the court are all lawyers, and I think that they have some sympathy for that very difficult task.
Well, we can hope.
Thank you. Viewers, I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. And if you're already a subscriber to the Berkshire Eagle, thank you very much. If you're not yet a subscriber, please consider becoming one. It's how we keep the flame of local journalism alive in this country. I'm Dalton Delan. I'll see you next time on Eagle Reels and in the pages of the Berkshire Eagle.